I had been trying to figure out a way or what angle I was going to take on the whole March for Our Lives demonstration last week, because I thought the kids were outstanding. I thought the young folks were outstanding. I was extremely touched and moved by the fact that Martin Luther King's granddaughter, Yolanda Renee King, was one of the speakers. And I think Yolanda was only about 7 or 8, something like that. So I wanted to see what angle was I going to take, because there's no doubt the voices needed to be heard, even though the likelihood of change in the way that we're looking for it is probably, and maybe it will come over time. But there was something that came to me about why the change is unlikely to occur, even though those kids did such a wonderful job. And I'm not saying no change will occur, but it is unlikely that the changes that we're looking for to occur. And the reason is profitability. And the more I think about it, or the more that, over the week that I thought about it, it's not just an issue of removing profitability, because that's what I thought in the beginning. But then I came across a podcast talking about another industry that I have issue with, and that's the medical industry. And it shifted my view in terms of not necessarily getting rid of profitability, but reframing how we do things. And I think what you're going to hear in this podcast, because I have multiple objectives whenever I do the Reading Circle, the Marc Medley Show, the Critical Thinker, any of those things, I have multiple objectives. And it is to inform, inspire, educate, and entertain. So this week, because I'm constantly on the lookout for something that will do those things, I was listening to a podcast, a TED Talk podcast, TED Talk Daily. And the question or the podcast topic, and it's only 11 minutes. I'm going to start off with that, and then I'll give my commentary behind it, because it's a nice lead in. It's a wonderful segue into what shifted my thinking into, because at first I said, just get rid of the profitability and all these things will change. But you don't necessarily have to get rid of the profitability, but we do need to reframe how we think about some things and how we do business. So I came across this podcast, and this person got exactly to that point. And the title of it is, What If We Paid Doctors to Keep People Healthy? Interesting paradigm, interesting shift. And you're going to hear how the presenter makes his case. His name is Matthias Mullenbeck. And the question is, what if we paid doctors to keep people healthy? Now, one might think that's what we do now, but no, we don't. After listening to this, you'll see we really don't pay doctors to keep people healthy. Right now, I have so many tracking apps on my phone to track my health that it's gotten to the point where it's not even funny, but I love it. I mean, I have an entire little block titled Health. And in that block, I have tracking mechanisms for my heart, for my blood glucose, for whenever I sleep, you name it, I can track it. I have the data for it. Matter of fact, what I'll do is before I start the podcast, I'll just kind of open up that part on the phone. Okay, I have life cycle, activity, sleep cycle, sleep watch, health, Welltory, health watch, heart rate, cardio, another heart rate. I have my app for the Y whenever I work out there. ICG training for the spin class, the cyclometer for when I ride my bike, Strava for when I ride my bike, pedometer, steps, life sum, Dario for the blood glucose, Clue, heart study, daily water, cholesterol, and then the rest are a bunch of mindfulness apps, and there's about 5 of them. So in total, I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28 apps dealing with my health. And those apps on my smartphone, on my iPhone, provide me with just about everything I need to know about how my body is functioning and how it's running, to the point where I can take the same information, and the accuracy is pretty close. You're talking 1% or 2% off, if that is in range. I can take that information and then give it to my doctor. I can email it to her. I can do a lot of things. That's where we are in 2018 in terms of the technology. So I'm saying all that to say, to lead into this podcast, this TED Talk, and then lead into the whole gun issue of which March for Our Lives was about last weekend. So I need you again. This is a part of the information, the education. I want you to be inspired. I want you to be educated. I want you to be entertained. But I want you to get something out of the time that we spend together on Saturday mornings. That is my desire for coming on the air, is to, again, make life better for not only myself, because I learn along with you on these Saturday mornings and whenever I create the podcast. And many times, like I'm going to do this morning, this is going to go into my podcast. This is going to be the next episode of the Marc Medley Show. This segment right here will be the Marc Medley Show, the next release of episode on the podcast. So listen to what Matthias has to say in terms of what if we paid doctors to keep people healthy. And it is a TED Talk daily and as a podcast that you can subscribe to as well.
Talk features business developer Matthias Mullenbeck, recorded live at TED at Merck, KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany, 2017.
By 2050, the world population will reach nearly 10 billion, and food production will need to grow by 70%. What if artificial intelligence could help? Farmers are already using it to help increase crop yields. Watson and the IBM Cloud provide access to weather data and analyze satellite imagery to help them monitor soil moisture levels and reduce water waste. So as the population grows, more food can be put on tables. Let's put smart to work. Find out how at ibm.com/smart.
It's 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm waking up in a Boston hotel room and can only think of one thing: tooth pain. One of my ceramic inlays fell off the evening before. 5 hours later, I'm sitting in a dentist's chair, but instead of having a repair of my inlay so that I can get rid of my pain, the dentist pitches me on the advantages of a titanium implant surgery. Ever heard of that? It essentially means to replace a damaged tooth by an artificial one that is screwed into your jaw. Estimated costs for the implant surgery may add up to $10,000. Replacing the ceramic inlay I had before would come at $800. Was it my health or the money that could be earned with me that was the biggest concern for my dentist? As it turned out, my experience wasn't an isolated case. A study by an US national newspaper estimated that in the United States, up to 30% of all surgical procedures, including stent and pacemaker implantations, hip replacements, and uterus removals, were conducted although other non-surgical treatment options had not been fully exploited by the physician in charge. Isn't that figure shocking? Numbers may be slightly different in other countries, but what it means is that if you go to a doctor in the US, you have a not insignificant chance to be subject of a surgical intervention without being in immediate need for it. Why is this? Why are some practitioners incentivized to run such unnecessary procedures? Well, perhaps it is because healthcare systems itself incentivize in a non-ideal way towards applying or not applying certain procedures or treatments. As most healthcare systems reimburse practitioners in a fee-for-service-based fashion on the number and kind of treatments performed, it may be this economic incentive that tempts some practitioners to rather perform high-profit surgical treatments instead of exploring other treatment options. Although certain countries started to implement performance-based reimbursement anchored on quality and efficacy matrix, overall there's very little in today's healthcare systems architecture to incentivize practitioners broadly to actively prevent the appearance of a disease in the first place and to limit the procedures applied to a patient to the most effective options. So how do we fix this? What it may take is a fundamental redesign of our healthcare system's architecture, a complete rethinking of the incentive structure. What we may need is a healthcare system that reimburses practitioners for keeping their customers healthy instead of almost only paying for services once people are already sick. What we may need is a transformation from today's system that largely cares for the sick to a system that cares for the healthy. To change our current sick care approach into a true healthcare approach. It is a paradigm shift from treating people once they have become sick to preserving the health of the healthy before they get sick. This shift may move the focus of all those involved, from doctors to hospitals to pharmaceutical and medical companies, on the product that this industry ultimately sells: health. Imagine the following. What if we redesign our healthcare system into one that does not reimburse practitioners for the actual procedures performed on a patient, but rather reimburses doctors, hospitals, pharmaceutical and medical companies for every day a single individual is kept healthy and doesn't develop a disease? In practical terms, we could, for example, use public money to pay a health fee to an insurance company for every day a single individual is kept healthy and doesn't develop a disease or doesn't require any other form of acute medical intervention. If the individual becomes sick, the insurance company will not receive any further monetary compensation for the medical interventions required to treat the disease of that individual, but they would be obliged to pay for every evidence-based treatment option to return the customer back to health. Once the customer is healthy again, the health fee for that individual will be paid again. In effect, all players in the system are now responsible for keeping their customers healthy, and they're incentivized to avoid any unnecessary medical interventions by simply reducing the number of people that eventually become sick. The more healthy people there are, the less the cost to treat the sick will be, and the higher the economic benefit for all parties being involved in keeping these individuals healthy is. This change of the incentive structure shifts now the attention of the complete healthcare system away from providing isolated and singular treatment options towards a holistic view of what is useful for an individual to stay healthy and live long. Now, to effectively preserve health, people will need to be willing to share their health data on a constant basis so that the healthcare system understands early enough if any assistance with regard to the health is needed. Physical examination, monitoring of lifetime health data, as well as genetic sequencing, cardiometabolic profiling, and imaging-based technologies will allow customers to make, together with health coaches and general practitioners, optimal and science-guided decisions for their diet, their medication, and their physical activity to diminish their unique probability to fall sick of an identified individual high-risk disease. Artificial intelligence-based data analysis and the miniaturization of sensor technologies are already starting to make monitoring of the individual health status possible. Measuring cardiometabolic parameters by devices like this, or the detection of circulating tumor DNA in your bloodstream early on after cancer disease onset, are only two examples for such monitoring technologies. Take cancer. One of the biggest problems in certain oncological diseases is that a large number of patients is diagnosed too late to allow them to be cured, although the drugs and treatments that could potentially have cured them are already existing today if the disease had only been detected earlier. New technologies allow now, based on a few milliliters of blood, to detect the presence of circulating tumor DNA and thus the presence of cancer early on in a really convenient manner. The impact that this early stage detection can have may be dramatic. The 5-year survival rate for non-small cell lung cancer when diagnosed at stage 1, which is early, is 49%. The same when diagnosed at stage 4, which is late, is below 1%. being potentially able to prevent a large number of deaths by something as simple as a blood test for circulating tumor DNA could make certain cancer types a manageable disease, as disease onset can be detected earlier and positive treatment outcomes can likely be increased. In 2012, 50% of all Americans had a single chronic disease, resulting in 86% of the $3 trillion US healthcare budget being spent for treating such chronic diseases. 86%. If new technologies allow now to reduce this 86%, why have healthcare systems not reacted and changed already? Well, a redesign of what today is a sick care system into a true healthcare system that focuses on prevention and behavioral changes requires every actor in the system to change. It requires the political willingness to shift budgets and policies towards prevention and health education to design a new set of financial and non-financial incentives. It requires creating a regulatory framework for the gathering, using, and sharing of personal health data that's at the same time stringent and sensible. It needs doctors, hospitals, insurers, pharmaceutical and medical companies to reframe their approach. And, most important, it can't happen without the willingness and motivation of individuals to change their lifestyle in a sustained way, to prioritize staying healthy in addition to opening up for sharing their health data on a constant basis. This change may not come overnight, but by refocusing the incentives within the healthcare industry today to actively keep people healthy, we may not only be able to prevent more diseases in the first place, but we may also be able to detect onset of certain preventable diseases earlier than we do today, which will lead to longer and healthier lives for more people. Most of the technologies that we need to initiate that change are already existing today. But this is not the technology question. It is primarily a question of vision and will. Thanks a lot.
For more TED Talks, go to TED.com.
All right. You had the opportunity to listen to that. And I'm quite sure you're probably wondering, what does that have to do for or with the March for Our Lives movement? And I'll tell you what it has to do with it. And I'm going to talk about a couple of other industries as well. At the end of the day, when you really come down and think about it, everything boils down to money. Everything boils down to the almighty dollar. Now, you can agree or disagree. Again, as I said earlier, my objective is not to get you to agree with my opinion. I don't care if you agree or not. And also, as we gave the disclaimer, the views and opinions heard here on this show are solely those of the host and guest and may not be necessarily supported by the station owner. And in my case, whoever you are who are listening, you may or may not agree, and that's okay. But I at least want you to think about something in a way that you might not have thought about it prior to listening to what I'm saying right now. So as I said, when it's all said and done, I don't care what the field is. I don't care if it's education. I don't care if it's the gun lobbyists. I don't care if it's pharmaceutical, if it's the oil, if it's the food industry, regardless of what the industry, at the end of the day, it comes down to the almighty dollar. Now, the Bible says it is the love of money that is the root of all evil. And a lot of people get that messed up. A lot of people think that the Bible says money is the root of all evil. Not necessarily so. It is the love of it that is the root. And because folks love money so much that they are willing to do anything to get it, to hurt anyone to get it, or to lose as many lives as need to be lost in order to get it, that's where this root is really getting messed up. And that's where the connection for me over the last week, when I was thinking about an angle that I wanted to talk about the March for Our Lives movement, the angle that I wanted to take. And as spirit would have it, this podcast came my way and it gave me a focus of where I wanted to go. Now, years ago on this very show, I had the author of a book called Our Daily Meds, and the author was Melody Peterson. This is going years back. I had Melody on the show and we talked about her book, Our Daily Meds, how the pharmaceutical companies transform themselves into slick marketing machines and hooked the nation on prescription drugs. Outstanding book. Again, the title is Our Daily Meds, how the pharmaceutical companies transform themselves into slick marketing machines and hooked the nation on prescription drugs. Now, right now we're going through the old opioid thing, the whole opioid addiction crisis. We're going through that now. Well, see, this book gets into that. There's another book that deals with the food industry. It's called Salt, Sugar, Fat, how the food giants hooked us. Salt, sugar, fat, how the food giants hooked us. And that's by Michael Moss. The same thing occurs in education. The same thing occurs in the oil industry. And for sure, you can rest assured the whole gun thing has something to do with that as well. Profitability, money. There's money in war. There's money in the manufacture of guns. There's money in failure in education. There's money in, as you just heard Matthias Mullenbeck say, in terms of the healthcare industry. There's money in all these surgeries. There's money in all these prescriptions. Sometimes the surgeries is not necessarily needed. And yet the first thing the physician will do is prescribe that particular procedure, when in many instances the procedure could have been or the cure or the relief could have been handled in a different way. So last weekend, the children had a wonderful, and it's still going on. It hasn't stopped. And I don't think these children are going to stop. Good for them. I think their voices are going to continue to be heard. Good for them, because maybe some change will come. But it's going to have to be the reframing in terms of this profitability thing. Somewhere in there, the profit is going to have to be gained a different way. Originally, I had said, you got to take the profitability out of this. But then after hearing Matthias, I said, okay, maybe we don't have to take the profitability out. We just need to reframe or reshape how we make the profits. So as you heard him say, maybe, you know what, for every person that you keep well, that you prevent from getting sick, that's where your profit will come from. Instead of paying you after the person is sick, we're going to pay you for every patient that you prevent sickness from. And it's the same thing with all the other industries as well. So you can still have your profit. We just need to reframe how you do it. And because I'm saying it this way, the industries that you think would be there to keep us alive really could care less if we stay alive or not. Think about that. This is one of those, never thought about it that way. The industries that we take for granted, and I just named a few of them, the pharmaceutical industry, Our Daily Meds does a wonderful job with that. The food industry, Salt, Sugar, Fat does a wonderful job with that. I was just looking up, there's various books now on the NRA. I'm going to download a couple of those and read in terms of what's the real motive behind that. I get the whole thing of everybody having guns and you pull one on me, I'm going to pull one on you. I get that, but there's more to it than that. I guarantee you underlying at the end of the day, there's profit that goes along with this. There's profit in war. We talk about we don't want to be in war, but the truth of the matter is war brings profit. War brings money. War brings contracts. So at the root of all of these things, including the whole gun control issue, at the end of the day, when all is said and done, at the root is money. At the root is profit. And we are a capitalistic society. So to say that we're going to remove profit would be ridiculous. But at the same time, maybe the way we make our profits, we really need to take a look at. Because I'm going to say again, industries that one at first glance, one at a glance, one at taking for granted would think that, oh yeah, they're there to keep us alive. The food industry wouldn't put anything in there that would kill us. Think again. Oh, yeah, the pharmaceutical industry. Oh, yes, they're there to keep us alive. They wouldn't do anything that would give us anything that we'd become addicted to. Look at it. Think again. Matter of fact, if you look at our daily meds, Melody gets into the whole thing of created diseases. Take a look at the advertisements. When you look at certain programs like the news or whatever, how many ailments are advertised? Some of those ailments were created by the pharmaceutical companies. Some of those ailments are not ailments. They're the natural process of aging. But they make it appear as if it is something that you have to have a drug for. But you'd have to read our daily meds for that. Salt, sugar, fat. If you read Michael Moss's book, he gets into how, matter of fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back, and I know this is going to be one of my longer podcasts, but that's okay, because this is going to be one of my longer segments because it is that important. I'm going to read the synopsis of those two books. Our Daily Meds, How the Pharmaceutical Companies Transform Themselves into Slick Marketing Machines and Hook the Nation on Prescription Drugs. Here's one of the synopsis. In the last 30 years, pharmaceutical companies have seized control of American medicine by putting their marketers in charge. They invent diseases in order to sell the pills that, quote, cure, unquote, them. They sway doctors by giving them resort vacations, gourmet meals, and fistfuls of cash. They advertise prescription drugs at NASCAR races, on subways, and even in churches. Medicines can save lives, but the relentless promotions of these products has come at a tremendous cost. Prescription pills taken as directed are estimated to kill 1 American every 5 minutes. More Americans are addicted to medications than cocaine. And roads have become less safe as the over-medicated take to the wheel. In Our Daily Meds, journalist Melody Peterson connects the dots to show how subtle, far-reaching, and dangerous Big Pharma's powers have become. That's PHARMA', Big Pharma's, meaning pharmaceutical companies, powers have become. Now, that was a synopsis for Our Daily Meds. Let's take a look at the synopsis for salt, sugar, fat. New York Times bestseller. Every year, the average American eats 33 pounds of cheese and 70 pounds of sugar every day. We ingest 8,500 milligrams of salt, double the recommended amount, almost none of which comes from the shakers on our table. It comes from processed food, an industry that hauls in $1 trillion in annual sales. In Salt, Sugar, Fat, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter Michael Moss shows how we ended up here, featuring examples from Kraft, Coca-Cola Lunchables, Frito-Lay, Nestle, Oreos, Capri Sun, and many more. Moss's explosive, empowering narrative is grounded in meticulous, eye-opening research. He takes us into labs where scientists calculate the bliss point of sugary beverages, unearths marketing techniques taken straight from tobacco companies' playbooks, and talks to concerned insiders who make startling confessions. Just as millions of heavy users are addicted to salt, sugar, and fat, so too are the companies that peddle them. You will never look at nutrition labels the same way again. Praise for salt, sugar, and fat, a remarkable accomplishment. The New York Times book review Michael Moss has written a fast food nation for the processed food industry. Burrowing deep inside the big food manufacturers, he discovered how junk food is formulated to make us eat more of it. And he argues persuasively, actually, to addict us. Michael Pollan, if you had any doubt as to the food industry's complicity in our obesity epidemic, it will evaporate when you read this book. The Wall Street Journal, an exactingly researched, deeply reported work of advocacy journalism. So, again, read Salt, Sugar, Fat. It'll change your perspective. Read Our Daily Meds. It will change your perspective. So the fact that those children were out there and they're protesting this whole gun lobbying, the gun laws, outstanding. I could not have been more proud of their efforts, because maybe they will cause that paradigm shift that I'm talking about. Maybe the profitability will still be there, but maybe how they receive the profit will shift. Because if we were serious about the whole notion, and I've said this before, and I've said this in various podcasts, and I've said this here on the air on the show here, if we were really serious about changing mindsets about guns, we'd stop at the lowest level. That means the toy manufacturers. They would stop manufacturing these little toy guns. Because I've said before, there's not one bodega in my neighborhood that I can't go in and see these little black guns hanging over the counter. Right where you pay, right where you've gotten your product and you go up to the counter to pay the bodega owner, up on top is a whole rack full of toys. And that's by design. And right in the front, the most prominent are the toy guns. And not all of them are water pistols. Because I would do away with the water pistols too at this point. But if we were really serious, we'd stop the manufacture of the toy guns. And then if we didn't stop the manufacture of it, then you know what? The big store owners and the bodega owners stop ordering it. Because you cut off the demand, the supply will stop. So as soon as the bodega owners get together and the Walmarts and the Targets of the world and the Kohl's and all these other stores and the Toys R Us's and anywhere else that sells toys, once they all got together and said, you know what, we're not going to purchase those little plastic toy guns anymore. Trust me, the supply would dry up. The manufacturer would stop making it because it's no longer, again, making money. It's not making a profit. So if we really were serious, all the video games, the violent video games, whatever, I never can get them names straight, so I'm not even going to try to call them. But you know what I'm talking about, the Xbox games, the PlayStation games, all those violent games where shooting and killing is the objective, that would stop. And again, the big stores, if they would stop ordering it and selling it, it would stop because it really is about supply and demand. So maybe we now pay folks not to. I mean, we pay farmers not to grow food. We pay, farmers, rather than us give it to other countries that could use it, that are starving, we pay farmers not to grow it. So why can't we pay the gun manufacturers not to make guns? Yeah, just a thought. Same way that you heard the gentleman in the TED talk about, well, how about if we paid doctors based on patients they kept from getting a disease opposed to paying them for trying to treat the disease? It's a different way of looking at things. Think about that title in this book, Our Daily Myth, how the pharmaceutical companies transform themselves into slick marketing machines and hooked. That word hooked is used in both of these book titles. The authors are two separate authors, and hooked the nation on prescription drugs. Salt, sugar, fat, how the food giants hooked us. All this is done by design, folks. All this talk about everybody having to have a gun and teachers having guns, that's all by design. The NRA is one of the largest lobbyists in Washington. They kick out probably pound per pound the most dollars of any lobbyist in Washington. At the end of the day, it comes down to the almighty dollar. It comes down to the love of money. Money in and of itself is nothing but paper and metal. The actual materials of money, paper, metal. But the love of it and the desire to have so much of it in excess of really what is needed is what are driving these industries to not give a hoot about life, to not give a hoot about whether you get well or not. Because this whole gun thing with all these folks, all of us getting gunned down in these various mass shootings, at the end of the day, the lives that are lost are just casualties of war. At the end of the day, the lives that are lost, okay, we do our routine. We pray, we hold vigils, we call off the names, we recognize and acknowledge the families, we keep our positive thoughts. But when all is said and done, it happens again. And it's going to keep happening until we reframe how the money is being made as a result of either purchasing a gun, using a gun, buying a gun, what have you. And the same holds true not only for the gun industry or the weapon industry, because there's money in war, but the same holds true for all of these industries that one would think are for our betterment, including education. And I meant educator, but that includes education. Another industry that one would think is for our betterment at the end of the day really boils down to the dollar as well. All right. That's my commentary for this morning. I thought the kids were great. I thoroughly enjoyed Martin Luther King's granddaughter. And of course, I'm biased because I just love that King family. So, and it's for their efforts of what their family stood for and stands for, of always trying to make life better for somebody else, trying to fight City Hall, trying to change things like anything that's unjust, any unjust laws, fighting those unjust laws or unjust principles. So the fact that you had Martin Luther King's daughter up there, oh, I know this is one time, because I know he's spinning in his grave for a lot of stupid stuff that's going on, but I know that was one time he was smiling from ear to ear to see his granddaughter, who was not around when he was around. Yolanda Renee King is only about 7 or 8. Her grandfather was assassinated this coming Wednesday, 50 years ago. And yet she was standing at that microphone last weekend saying enough is enough.